Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons, invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Elibet and thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed who stands before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. I'm sure glad we're a little more mature than that nowadays, and in our society, we don't look at outward appearance anymore, right? So what does the Lord look at? The Lord looks at the heart. But the Lord said to verse 8, then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, nor has the Lord chosen this one. And Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, are these all the sons you have? And they're still the youngest, Jesse said, but he's tending the sheep. Samuel says, send for him. We will sit down until he arrives. I think they were hungry, so they had a good meal. I think that's what they did. It doesn't say it, but I'm sure that's what they must have done. So they sent and had him brought in. He was ruddy, with a fine appearance and handsome features. Ruddy means he was like healthy looking. He was, just a real healthy complexion about him. Then the Lord said to him, rise and anoint him. He's the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Samuel went to Ramah. Okay, that's a little story. And that exemplifies, again, the upper and the lower picture. One thing is, when God calls any of you to a ministry, okay, it doesn't have to be king of Israel, okay? It can be, you name it. I mean, do you know what? He's got a task for each of you next week, this week. He's got something he wants you to do. He has something specific, someone he wants you to talk to, maybe it's something to do in your family. You will know if you're aware that God has something for you to do this week. Okay? And he'll give you the power to do it. That's one of the upper-lower story context right here. It's a God who gives power. His Spirit came upon David, and this 16-year-old kid had all of the tools necessary, not in himself, but because of God's power to accomplish incredible things. That same principle applies today, okay? Because his Spirit abides with us. I could give example after example of my own life. Are you kidding me? But yet God works through me. Not me, it's his Spirit. The same way all of us have that sober, honest evaluation of ourselves. But I want us to look at those 6 key words that we find in verse 7. The Lord looks at the heart. I'm going to bring you all back into the 3rd grade right now. I want us to say those words together so they lock into us. The Lord looks at the heart. All together. The Lord looks at the heart. Now, you can just hear those words and and this is why they pay pastors so much, because we're able to have insight into these things. That's a joke, by the way. That's okay. Thank you for at least the token laugh. I appreciate that. We can see that the Lord looks at the heart and say, well, yeah. I mean, God knows everything, right? That's kind of just the general way we can look at it. But let's take a step back. Let's personalize it, and let's think for a minute. The Lord looked at David's heart, and he saw something that greatly pleased him. And we'll talk about what that was in just a minute. But he looks at your heart too. Let's not just make this the general God who looks at the whole world and see. No. Your heart, I'll pick on Pastor Mike, right now, the absolute core of who you are, God is looking at that, and he looks at that, and he knows that. Every one of you. Okay? The Lord looks at your heart, and he knows your heart. Jeremiah 17:9 says something rather strange. It says, the heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? Ooh. Okay. Mom and Dad, do you think you know your kids' hearts? Well, kind of. You have a pretty good idea. I mean, you bore them and raised them and were with them. You know their personalities. You kind of do. We have 4 kids, and I kind of know my kids' hearts. Kind of. What about spouses? Those of you here who have been married 50 years, do you know each other's hearts? I know you haven't quite hit 50 yet, Pete and Mary, but I'll pick on you right now. I mean, you kind of do. Hopefully, I mean, Pete, you'd better know Mary's heart pretty well. And Mary, you'd better know Pete's heart. But you know what? There are things about your heart, Mary, that Pete doesn't know, and things about Pete's heart that you don't know, Mary. It's just the way it is. I don't care which couple you talk about. You can be the proverbial soulmate, but there are things about a heart. So what about your best friend or your brother? Or what about even yourself? You know, I know my heart, I think, because I'm a bit of a, reflective, introspective person, at least I think I am. But you know what? I don't know even my own heart perfectly. But the Lord looks at your heart. What does that do for you? Does it give you a little bit of, oh boy? I mean, it ought to. I think that ought to be our reaction when somebody knows us, to not just somebody, but the God of the universe, the Holy One, the perfect one, the righteous one, the one who created, the one who's close, the one who is other than us. He knows our motives, our desires, our mixed motives, the things we can't figure out. He knows our hidden evil thoughts. He knows our self-focus. We often say, oh, we're most concerned about, but most of us here, frankly, are most concerned about ourselves. That's the reality of it. That's just in general terms. He knows our heart. Yikes. Does that kind of bother you? Well, I didn't come here to give you bad news. The gospel is good news. I want you to listen and take into your hearts what God thinks of your heart. And this, by the way, is for believers in Jesus Christ. This is one of the privileges we have as those who have been called according to his purposes. I'm going to read 3 Bible passages. And I'm going to ask you to kind of read these. As I read them, just close your eyes, because I can concentrate better with my eyes closed. So kind of consider this like almost a prayer time, and try to do your best to focus and to listen to these verses as I read them. Psalm 139, 1 through 4. O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out, my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. And that word familiar in the Hebrew, just to let you know, it's the same word they use for the intimate relationship between a man and a woman, okay? It's not just kind of knows about, it's he knows intimately our ways. Before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. Okay, sort of a reiteration of what I've already been saying. Next verse. Come, now, let us reason together. Let's have a session of speaking, says the Lord.